I was 5 when my parents abandoned me in an airport. A red scarf trailed behind me on the icy floor as their footsteps disappeared, leaving me with a lie I was too young to question. 30 years later, they stood in a courtroom wearing smug smiles, certain they could strip me of everything I had. What they never understood was that the child they discarded had grown into someone who learned strength through silence, patience, and control. When the bailiff called, "All rise," the air shifted. I knew then this case had never been about money alone. It was about a truth they never anticipated, and what came next would shatter their certainty. That airport never left me. O'Hare, Terminal 3, buzzing with voices, announcements, and rolling luggage, yet I felt completely removed, as if the world were moving behind glass. My red scarf itched against my neck as I gripped it tightly, the only thing grounding me. Richard and Elaine Hart walked ahead without looking back, checking their watches, moving in perfect sync. When they gestured toward the baggage area and told me to wait, there was no fear in their faces, only relief. I sat on a metal bench and counted suitcases as the crowd thinned. Somewhere between 400 and 500, a realization settled in my chest: this wasn't a mistake. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been deliberately left behind. The empty terminal closed in on me, teaching me a lesson I would carry for life: that silence can wound deeper than cruelty, and that the world doesn't always notice when someone disappears. Then a man approached. Average height, gray suit, unremarkable, except for his intent. He knelt in front of me, careful not to touch, and met my eyes. "I'm Thomas," he said gently. A security guard moved to call it in, but Thomas intervened, calm and steady. In that moment, a stranger chose me when my own parents had not. Thomas stayed, through the authorities, through foster homes, and eventually forever. He lived quietly, helping others without recognition. Only after his death did I learn the truth: he had built a fortune in silence and left it all to me. $5.5 million. It couldn't repair a stolen childhood, but it was enough to make the world finally acknowledge my existence. The first response wasn't condolences or reconnection. It was a lawsuit. Richard and Elaine Hart had returned, not to apologize, but to claim what they believed was theirs. Their complaint was carefully written, portraying heartbreak, loss, and decades of suffering. They painted themselves as victims of circumstance. Every sentence was manipulation. But I knew better. I hadn't been lost. I had been discarded, and now they wanted to profit from it again. Sitting alone, the red scarf folded in my hands, I understood that silence could be sharpened into a weapon. They had initiated a battle, but I had 30 years of restraint, education, and resolve. I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't react. I would answer them through the law. That night, I stared at the papers without moving. They wanted every dollar Thomas left me. No phone call. No letter. Just entitlement. Anger rose slowly, controlled and deliberate. I didn't rush. I called someone who dealt in buried truths, Sarah Jenkins, a forensic accountant known for unraveling old financial lies. "Start at the beginning," I told her. "Everything from 1994 onward." While she worked, my thoughts returned to that terminal, the cold bench, the hum of machinery, the certainty that my parents had chosen anything but me. When Sarah called, her voice was flat. "You need to see 1995. She pulled up an old civil case. My parents had sued the airline, claiming I'd gone missing during an unaccompanied flight. The airline had settled for a significant sum. Then came the affidavit. They had legally declared me dead. Their signatures were right there. In that moment, everything aligned. Their confidence. Their greed. Their belief they could erase and reclaim me at will. But I was no longer a helpless child. I had authority. I had time. And I had proof. They had reopened a door they never should have touched. And this time, I was ready to walk through it. The real reckoning was just beginning. It hit me then: the past was never gone. Every lie, every act of greed, every carefully crafted deception had left a trail, a path only someone patient enough could follow. And I had that patience. 30 years of quiet, of observation, of waiting, had prepared me for this exact moment. They had underestimated me, as always. By nightfall, a plan was forming in my mind. I wasn't here merely to defend myself. I was here to let the law act where my words and tears had failed. Every signature, every receipt, every financial thread would be woven into a case that their polished performance couldn't withstand. They assumed they were suing a helpless victim. They didn't know they were stepping into a battle they couldn't win. For the first time in decades, I felt a sharp focus take hold, transforming into purpose. At my dining table, surrounded by stacks of bills, payments, and long-forgotten property records, the weight of stolen time pressed in, not money, but years of trust, innocence, and opportunity ripped away. The apartment smelled of old coffee and aging paper, a stark contrast to the precise, sterile world of the courtroom I now inhabited daily. Every document I touched carried the fingerprint of their calculated greed. Faded ink, folded corners, each mark testified to how methodically they had erased me. I called Sarah again, laying out the full scope. Trace everything back to 1994, I instructed. Every payment, every settlement, every dollar. I need the full picture. She agreed without question, professional and steady. That was exactly what I needed. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about constructing an airtight case they could not deny. As she worked, my mind returned to that terminal. The hum of conveyor belts, the way lights had dimmed when the crowd vanished, the cold metal bench where I had counted 500 pieces of luggage. That silence, once crushing, had become my teacher. It had taught me patience, observation, and how to measure every moment before acting. I mapped each memory, every tiny detail that could turn the tide in my favor. Then came the first thread, payments from the 1995 settlement, signed affidavits, and receipts, proof that my parents had profited from my absence. While the world believed they were grieving, they were thriving. Each new piece of evidence tightened a coil in my chest, but I stayed calm. Anger without control would weaken me. Years on the bench had taught me the value of composure. Every breath, every small movement, every silent calculation mattered. By the third day, the framework of the case was complete. The victims of their own deceit were about to confront the truth they had hidden for decades. I glanced at the red scarf folded neatly on my desk. Once a shield, it was now armor, a symbol of what I had survived and what I would wield. Every act of betrayal was now evidence, carefully organized, ready to be unleashed. When they returned, expecting the frightened child they had abandoned, they would instead meet the woman who had spent 30 years preparing for this exact confrontation. Their smirks would collide with the cold, measured machinery of justice. They had unlocked a door they were about to walk straight into, a trap they couldn't escape. Sleep didn't matter. Each hour spent reviewing documents, payments, and affidavits was a promise to myself. When they stepped into that courtroom, I would no longer be a child. I would be the judge. The morning they arrived in Chicago, I waited quietly in an empty courtroom. Richard and Elaine Hart entered late, exuding confidence, smug and sure of victory, followed by their attorney carrying neatly stacked papers, grinning as if the outcome was already theirs. They didn't glance at me. They didn't know I was presiding today. I sat with my hands folded over the red scarf, my talisman, a reminder of every lesson endured, every hardship survived. The courtroom fell silent. Their smirks widened when the clerk called the case, assuming I would hesitate or recuse myself. They had no idea the trap was set. The first witness for their side recited rehearsed lines about a lost daughter, the grief of 30 years, the agony of helpless parents. Their words were smooth, polished, convincing, to anyone who hadn't lived the truth. I listened, expression unreadable, letting the lies hang in the air. Pulse steady, heart calm. Rage had no place here. Only strategy mattered. Then came the moment that shifted everything. I called Lily Hart to the stand. She approached, shoulders slightly hunched, carrying the weight of a lifetime apologizing for existing. Yet when she spoke, her voice carried quiet authority. She recounted the years living in a home haunted by a story that wasn't hers, growing up as the replacement, a living witness to their manipulation. Richard shifted subtly in his seat, his hands trembling as Lily unveiled the truth. Elaine's lips parted, then closed, unable to swallow the narrative unraveling before them. Lily's voice was calm, piercing, undeniable. Her testimony cut through the courtroom like a sharp blade. She recounted receipts, travel records, and gambling logs, all coinciding with the days they claimed to be searching for me. The truth was undeniable. They hadn't mourned, they had celebrated. They hadn't worried, they had profited. Every lie was exposed. I let silence hang after each revelation. 30 years of patience had taught me its power. Every pause pressed their guilt against them. Their attorneys shuffled nervously. Their confident smirks faltered, flickers of panic flashing across their faces. The story they had spent decades crafting was collapsing. I leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the bench, the red scarf folded beneath them. On top lay the certified affidavit from 1995, signed by them, legally declaring me dead in exchange for a settlement. Their signatures became the chains that bound them. I let the weight of that fact fill the room, inescapable and undeniable. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise for the judge." Heads turned, the atmosphere shifted. For a moment, their world wobbled. The predators who thought they owned the room now felt small, trapped, exposed. I rose slowly, heels clicking against the polished floor, each step deliberate. They looked up, finally seeing me, not the frightened child, but the authority they had always underestimated. Calm, precise, I addressed them directly. You sold me. You abandoned me. You profited from my absence and thought you could do it again. Today, this court decides the cost of your choices. Each word struck deliberately. They opened their mouths to protest, to plead, but the law was unmovable, and 30 years of preparation weighed heavily over them. I instructed the bailiff to present all evidence, payments, bills, affidavits, receipts spanning 3 decades. Lily's testimony reinforced the story, each detail dismantling their carefully constructed narrative. I watched Richard shrink in his chair, Elaine tremble. Confidence replaced with raw panic. Their attorney tried to intervene, but the momentum had shifted irreversibly. The court clerk read the affidavit aloud, each line a hammer shattering their illusion. They had acknowledged my death legally. Now, they were powerless. They thought they were suing a victim, but they faced a judge who had mastered patience, strategy, and control. Every smug glance, every rehearsed smile, every lie unraveled under 30 years of meticulously gathered evidence. I paused briefly, letting the weight of their exposure settle before delivering the final verdict. Case dismissed with prejudice. Plaintiffs will be referred to the district attorney for investigation of perjury and fraud. The gavel struck like a long-awaited exhale. Richard and Elaine gasped, their carefully curated world crumbling. Officers stepped forward, and for the first time in decades, I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice, not vengeance, but truth, inevitability, and consequences perfectly executed. I turned, walking out with Lily at my side. For 30 years, they had been predators, and I had been the hunted child. Today, the roles reversed. Though the courtroom emptied, the echoes of justice would linger far longer than their lies ever could. Sitting quietly afterward, I let it sink in. Richard and Elaine Hart were no longer figures of power, their reputation shattered, their influence slipping through fingers that once treated me as an object. The media might cover it for a day, but the truth, my truth, was permanent. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. Justice wasn't satisfaction. It was balance restored. I glanced at Lily, shoulders no longer burdened by guilt or fear. For the first time, she didn't have to perform grief or uphold a story that wasn't hers. We exchanged a quiet look. The past shaped us, but it no longer controlled us. The $5.5 million Thomas left me was never for indulgence. I used it to launch the Baggage Claim Foundation, supporting foster youth aging out of the system, making sure no child would ever feel invisible or abandoned. Every dollar became a promise, someone would stand for them when the world didn't. Months later, we met in a Chicago cafe, warm coffee in hand, the red scarf draped around my neck, a quiet emblem of resilience. Lily laughed freely for the first time in years. I realized survival wasn't enough. Together, we could rebuild, brick by brick, guided by truth, care, and justice. The past had shaped us, but it no longer owned us. I sipped my coffee, the red scarf now a symbol of strength. Lily sat across from me, smiling easily. The city hummed around us, but inside there was stillness, the kind that follows storms. I had reclaimed my life, and in doing so, could help others reclaim theirs. If this story resonates, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe, because no one should face betrayal alone.